Hello everyone and welcome. We are so very glad to have you join us today for our webinar on managing a project with your team. I am Kathy Vasquez. I'm with Max Technical Training and I'm going to be your moderator today. Want to let you know about our next webinar. We have one more next week in our series. That webinar is scheduled for Thursday, November 5th, and it is entitled IT Architecture for Non-Architects. This is a webinar that you might find of interest. It tells you all about the different types of architecture, the value of them, and goes a little bit into if you might be interested in moving into that area, what a career would be in IT architecture. And now I have to give you my 30-second commercial. Max Technical Training is the host of all of these webinars that you've been joining, if you have been joining them. Max is a premier provider of software and professional skills education for IT and business professionals, delivering training in top technologies and methodologies for over 17 years. Clients prefer Max because our trainers are highly qualified experts in their subject areas. They actually help the client solve real problems as part of their classroom experience. Max is also an annual sponsor for our IIBA Cincinnati and PMI Southwest Ohio. Instruction at Max is not one size fits all. We develop and deliver modified and customized curriculum, and we can deliver the training privately on the client site. We also provide follow-up mentoring, coaching, and consulting for those clients who need that extra boost to transform training into action. My commercial's over. Thank you for that. We're just about ready to start, so I just have a few housekeeping tips for you. Lou is going to present for about 45 minutes. He is open to taking questions throughout the presentation, so just type your questions into the questions section on the GoToWebinar doc, and we'll try to get those covered. If for some reason we can't get to your question, then we'll cover those at the end. If you have any comments or any issues that you would like to share with us, please use the chat section. Our IT technical lead, Brandon, is going to be available if anybody should have some issues with connecting. We are recording this webinar, and you will be receiving an email with a link to both the recording and the slide deck tomorrow morning. And now I'm very pleased to introduce you to Lou Bergner, PMP and MBA. He is a senior consultant. Lou brings over 25 years of project management and BA consulting and training expertise in multiple industries, from banking and manufacturing, and also in both the profit and nonprofit sectors. Lou's extensive background includes working with organizations around the world to provide best practices expertise. He holds his MBA, and that blends that and his manager's perspective with his project management skills. He combines these strengths with his understanding of technology to support clients and to improve processes. Thank you very much, Lou. Thank you for coming and welcome.
Good. Thank you, Kathy. We'll just jump straight in here. What we're talking about today is stakeholders. How do we manage a project with our team? And you'd be surprised at the number of people that say, project management is wonderful, but you know what? The toughest thing is working with all the people, both the team and our stakeholders. So one of the things that we have to realize is why stakeholders are so important. Right? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about who are our stakeholders. What is a stakeholder anyway? Well, understand, project stakeholders are the owners of the goals. They set what the requirements are, whether it's business requirements, the high-level requirements about what it is that we need to do for the organization, or whether it's about user requirements, what the user needs us to produce for them to solve their problem, or what the technical folks need in order to develop that solution. Okay, so we have all these different stakeholders whose needs have to be blended together, and we have to come up with a solution that meets that. And juggling these stakeholders, it's probably the toughest thing that we've got to do. It's the term, herding cats comes to mind, and the idea that each stakeholder has their own view of what it is that we need to produce, and they often have a difficult time of expressing what it is that they need. Some of you may have experienced the awful situation where you go to a stakeholder and they say, well, what do you need? And they say, well, I need a system. And they say, well, okay, fine, but what's the system supposed to do? And basically the answer comes back and says, well, it's supposed to do stuff. Well, what stuff? Well, I don't know. The same stuff it's already doing, but faster. right? And we need to actually take that and turn it into something that we can actually make. Now, what's a stakeholder? Who's a stakeholder, right? A stakeholder, I like using 3 I's, right? A stakeholder is anybody that has an interest in the project. There's 1 I. Anybody who can influence the project. There's another one. And anybody who can impact the project. Okay? So we tend to think about stakeholders very narrowly, thinking about the people that, for whom we're doing the work. Stakeholders actually include us because we can affect the outcomes. We can influence the outcomes of the project. We have an interest in the project. So we're stakeholders. Okay? Senior management is often a stakeholder. Our users, our customers are often stakeholders. Okay? And we have to think about all of them. Now, typically, a project will have some, sort of standard stakeholders. We sort of know who they are. They're the normal cast of characters. We often define that very narrowly, and we end up missing stakeholders. Now, you may be able to relate to a situation where, if we don't actually identify all the stakeholders, eventually those stakeholders will come out of the woodwork. And that normally happens right about the time that we're going to go live with a system. And somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, Kathy, you know what? I've been thinking about this system that you're working on, that you're about to sort of release. And I've been wanting to tell you this for a while, but I figured, since I'm a stakeholder, you'd come and talk to me. But since you haven't, I really thought that before we go live, you probably want to know about this. Does everybody realize how badly that's going to end? Right? So one of the things that we need to do is to consciously and physically make a list of the stakeholders, understand who they are, understand what their needs are, and that list has got to be a living, breathing list. We've got to keep adding to it. We need to know whether these stakeholders are positive or negative. Do they support our project, or are they against our project? You know those people, right? Those are the people who are looking for any chance to put your project down so that they can have your resources or your job, right? We need to know who's out there, right? And we need to make sure that we understand that some of the stakeholders that we're dealing with may not even be part of our organization. If you're outsourcing some of the work that you're doing, your suppliers then become stakeholders. If you're buying equipment from another organization, that supplier is a stakeholder, right? We have to consider their needs, their requirements, their interests, their impacts in order to blend that in with everything else in our projects. So this is really a critical part of what we do as project managers. Okay, now PMI in the 5th edition of the project of the PMBOK, instead of using 3 I's, interest, impact, and influence, they use affect 3 different ways. A stakeholder is any individual, group, or organization who may be affected by or perceive itself to be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome of a project. Basically, it's the same definition, okay? Either one works for me. Okay, now, one of the things we do is once we've identified the stakeholders, we need to analyze them. We need to understand who they are. So we want to prepare a stakeholder register. By the way, if you look on the control panel, there are several handouts there. One of them is a project management workbook, and the first page on that project management workbook is a stakeholder register. It looks sort of like this, but there's more to it. Okay, so we want to identify who they are, understand what their impact is, what their level of influence is on our project, right? And this is going to help us determine how we're going to communicate with these various audiences, notice that's plural, for our project, okay? So we're going to look at a couple of tools just really quickly that we might use in order to do some stakeholder analysis. So what we want to do is we want to sort of get an idea of what's their level of interest, how much impact do they have, how much influence do they have, what's their tolerance for risk? What's their attitude to the project? Are they supporting us or are they against us, right? And I'm thinking about the general level of risk that they're willing to accept, and I'm thinking insurance companies. Insurance companies generally very risk averse, right? They don't want risk, okay? I know they deal with risk all the time, but they deal with it in a way that they really aren't taking any risk. They're charging premiums to make sure that they're not going to take a loss. Now, one of our presidential candidates, the guy with the hair, he's very risk tolerant. He's a risk taker, right? So we need to understand what their level of risks are. And we can use a couple of things. If we put use a stoplight chart, red, yellow, green, that's one way to set up a hierarchy of stakeholders in terms of those that are particularly important that we're going to make red. These are the ones that we want to watch out for. We want to keep close eye on. Yellow, they're reasonably important, and green, maybe not so much. Same thing, you could do it level 1, level 2, level 3. Same thing, very simple. Another tool that I like, and we're going to see on the next slide, is this power and interest grid. And what this does is it gives us a measure of how much influence people have, power, and how much interest they have in our project, okay? And conventional wisdom says that we're going to deal with each of those groups, the groups in each of those quadrants, a little bit differently. Okay, let's look at that, and then if anybody's got any questions, we'll take a look at those. Okay, understand not all stakeholders are equal, right? Some are more important, some are less important. Okay, we want to be concerned about those most important ones, and so we need to identify them. We can't just leave that to chance. It's too important. Now, this power and interest grid, sometimes called the power and influence grid, it's the same thing. Notice that we've got negative interest, negative power, and I'm not sure that's really negative. You can call it low and high if you want. I like positive and negative, right? It indicates the same thing. Now let's take a look at this for a second. Notice up here we've got positive and positive. High influence or high interest, right? And high power, right? So hopefully this is the sponsor of my project right here up in this upper right-hand corner. I'm probably down here someplace as the project manager, or even as a business analyst. I'm probably down here, right here with a project manager. There's some other people that are really, fairly high-power people that are in favor of our project, right? Down here we've got people, these may be our customers, right, or the users. They're very interested in the project for the most part, but they don't have much authority. Over here we've got my friend, well, he's not really my friend, but guy that I call Mr. Negative, right? This is the guy who really isn't interested in our project. Now, is he really negative? No, not necessarily. He could be. But he certainly doesn't have any particular appreciation for our project. So this guy might be taking pot shots at our project, and he's very high-powered, right? A lot of authority, maybe the vice president of this, that, or the other. Okay, and then we've got some, people down here in this lower left-hand quadrant where, they don't have much power and they don't have much interest in the project. Okay, now what we want to do, these people up here in the upper right-hand quadrant, these people we want to manage very closely. I want to make sure that they don't get blindsided. These are my champions. If anybody's going to come to the rescue, it's going to be these folks, right, up in this upper right-hand quadrant. High power, high interest. Okay, over here in the upper left-hand quadrant, I need to keep these people satisfied. If I can keep Mr. Negative and his minions satisfied, they're not going to be taking pot shots because they're happy enough. Okay, if I can keep, let them know what the project has in store for them, how it's going to help them, and right, maybe he won't be quite so nasty. Okay, and then down here in the bottom two quadrants, I like to think of these people as cheerleaders. Okay, the cheerleaders don't win the game, but it's nice to hear happy noise coming from the sidelines, isn't it? Now, what we want to do is we want to monitor these people. These are the cheerleaders for the other side. right? These are the cheerleaders that are rooting for the other team. So if they start making noise, what are we going to do over here? Oops, sorry, over here. We're going to tell our people, we're going to keep our people informed. These are our cheerleaders. We're going to keep our people informed so that they can start making happy noise. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? What we want to do is we want to keep these stakeholders engaged. We have to keep them informed, keep them engaged, and we need to manage them in ways that are effective in garnering the support and clearing the way for our project to be executed successfully. Does anybody have any questions?
No, we don't have any questions yet, Lou.
Okay, Kathy, oh, it is right after this slide. Yippee!
Yep.
Okay, we have a question for you then. We actually have a polling question for you. Here we go. We need your votes.
We've got 36% have voted, 40%. Excellent. Keep it coming, everyone. That's pretty quick. 80%. I'll keep it open 10 more seconds. Five seconds left. Get your vote in. All right, we're going to close the poll now and share the results with everyone. Can you see that, Lou?
All right. Well, we need to work on this definition a little bit more. It really is all of the above. Users are stakeholders, managers are stakeholders, and the developers are stakeholders. Let me explain why. Managers are stakeholders because they determine which projects we're going to work on. They determine what we often call the business need, which is why we're bothering to do this anyway. What's the impact that we hope to have with this project? So they're a stakeholder at that level. That need has to be satisfied. The users, obviously, because they're going to be using the system. These are the people that are going to give us the requirements for the user interface, what has to happen, what does the system have to produce. They are certainly stakeholders as well. The developers are stakeholders because they need to know, or we need to know from them, what it is that they can do. What do they need from us? What are their requirements? And they're also going to help us develop what we call the non-functional requirements, right? The quality of service kinds of things, the compliance kinds of things that the users and managers may not be really familiar with and may tend to overlook, right? So the developers are going to let us know, how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost, what are the resources that we need in order to get this done. So the developers are stakeholders in that sense as well. So that said, all of the above is really the answer. And we have to, as I mentioned, we have to blend all of these together, okay? Making sure that we can satisfy the needs of all of these groups. If any of them aren't satisfied, our project is going to have some serious difficulties. All right? Thank you, Kathy. All right, let's move on. Still no questions?
No, we don't have any questions still.
Okay, good. So when we start a project, now we're going to talk about some of these needs that these stakeholders have. Remember we talked about management, determining what we call the business need? Well, that's going to be captured in a couple of these places, right? The market demand, strategic opportunities, right? Do we need to increase our market share, right? Do we need to increase revenue? Do we need to increase the profit? Then we've got strategic alignment, right, or the business need. Where do we want to be in 5 years, 10 years? And which projects are going to get us there, right? So we have to start thinking about that in terms of what we want to do. When we start thinking about the social need, the environmental considerations, customer requests, technological advances, and legal requirements, these are some of the categories of reasons for which we would want to undertake a project, right? Please understand, think about this for a second. Most people don't like change. Most people are fine just going along the way things have been. We don't need change. Don't want change. That means that means I get out of my comfort zone. Okay? So the next part of that is projects are all about change. Right? That's why we do projects in the first place. To take us from where we are to someplace else. So do you hear the rub there? Do you hear the dichotomy there? People don't like change, but we're all about change. So there's got to be a reason. There's got to be enough pain, if you would, to make us get involved in a project. And that could be market demand. Somebody's asked us, we need to increase our market share. It may be there's an opportunity. We've got a customer that asked us to do this, right? It may be there's new technology. Maybe a customer requested it. Environmental considerations, ecology. Okay, so we have to, what's Tesla doing right now? Right? They're coming up with a relatively low-cost electric vehicle. Right? Why? Because there are environmental considerations out there that are now becoming so clear that we have to do something, and they're taking advantage of that. Right? Legal requirements. We've got compliance issue with regulatory things. Right? Any of these can be a motive for us to undertake a project. Okay? And just so you know, when you're doing a project, please do me a favor, do yourself a favor. As you're getting your project started, the first thing we often want to do is go to our users and say, all right, so what is it that you need us to do for you? Okay? I want you to change that. Okay? From now on, what I want you to do is as soon as you get a project, I want you to go to management. And I want and the question you need to ask them is, why are we doing this? What's moving us to do this? Is there a market demand? Is there a social need? What's going on? What are we hoping to accomplish? Now that's critically important. If you know what that reason is, it will help you bulletproof your project. Okay? What I mean is, some of you may have worked on projects where somebody comes along when you're halfway through the project and they say, well, we're cutting your funding. And I'm thinking, why are you cutting my funding? Well, if I don't know why we're doing this, if I have no idea where this fits in the organization's strategic objectives or anything of that sort, I don't really have a leg to stand on. Okay, fine. You're taking $100,000 away from my project. At that point, all I can do is say, all right, what don't you want me to do? Which part of this don't you want? Now, normally we don't give that kind of feedback. We just say, okay, fine, I'll do everything, but we'll just make it cheaper, right? Which either means a lot of overtime or it means we're going to drop the level of quality, right? On the other hand, if you do know why we're doing this, if you can tie it into the strategic plan of the organization, when they come to you and they say, Kathy, we're cutting your project funding by $100,000, or we're taking away a key resource from you, then Kathy can legitimately come back and you say, wait a second, this project is strategically important. We said that this project is going to move us forward in these ways. What changed?
Lou, the other thing
Go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing I would think this would be a value, if you have this down, being the communications person that I am, if you have somebody who even questions the value of your project, you have that right now to share, so that everybody understands the importance of your project before it even gets to a conversation about cutting.
Absolutely, Kathy. And you can certainly, when they talk about cutting, either way, you can always come back to that value, that intrinsic value. And you can deal, when Mr. Negative rears his ugly head, right, you can bring up this value proposition again, right? It's absolutely crucial. So make sure before you go start talking to users, make sure that you tie this one down. Okay, please do that. I mean, it's not for me, right? But it's going to make your life easier. All right? Okay, moving on. Now, when we think about this business need, we want to be really specific, right? Now, we get a little bit, well, we talk about business needs in multiple ways. I like thinking about business needs as what we were just talking about, the strategic kind of business need. But if we think about requirements, the PMBOK, which is the guide to the project, I'm sorry, the guide to the project management body of knowledge, PMBOK, project management body of knowledge, talks about a requirement as a condition or capability that's required to be present in a product, service, or result to satisfy a contract or other formally imposed specification. And this definition, by the way, is very similar to the one that the International Institute of Business Analysis uses. As a matter of fact, I think it may be word for word. Same definition, right? It states what that capability or condition is. Now, these requirements ought to be formal, right? We want to document them so that we know what they are. These are our formal goals for the project, whether it's that high-level business goal of increasing sales by 20%, or if it's having a way to produce an aging report, a receivables aging report on an accounting program, okay? That's a specific goal. Now, these requirements are the reason for our projects to satisfy these requirements, right? The requirements drive the scope of the project. Fair enough? Okay, moving forward. Now, as we think about managing stakeholder expectations, the first thing we have to do is to identify them, right? The stakeholders have an idea about what they want, right? About how things ought to be going forward, what the features are that they want to have created, right? So now what we have to do is we've got to draw those out. We have to elicit those from our stakeholders and write them down really clearly, right? No bias, no spin, no twist, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take our stakeholder register and our project charter, which is what gets us started. It says, here's what we're trying to achieve. And then we're going to use that to go to our stakeholders and say, all right, in order to achieve what's been set out for us in the project charter, what do you need us to do for you? Okay? And they're going to start giving us requirements, right? I need this in order to be able to achieve that, okay? And we need to document those things. And we need to, by the way, we need to come back to them and say, here's what I've understood from what you've said, right? And we may not want to do that with each individual requirement, but at some point we need to take it back to them and say, here's what we've understood. Does this describe what it is that you want us to do for you? Okay? And at some point, I want them either to be nodding their heads, or at very particular points, I want them to sign off and say, yep, that's it. If you do that, life will be good, right? We're going to be sitting in tall cotton, right? This is what we need. Now, this is important, because if I can get their agreement and their buy-in, number one, they're engaged. Number two, I've got something to say, here's what you said you wanted. Now I have something to work towards. All right? Now, when we think about actually taking these stakeholders and this team that's got to work together, which includes the management and our users and our developers and our project team, right? All with their own requirements, right? We need to blend those together. We need to develop a requirements work plan about how we're going to elicit those requirements. How are we going to present them? And please understand, one of the major causes of project failure is poor scope definition. And the reason that happens is because we don't get the requirements. We talk to a stakeholder and they say, here's what I need. We say, okay, fine, I'll do that for you. we don't really dig down into that and say, well, what does that look like? What does that mean to you? Right? So we probably want to, set out a timetable for our collection. We want to probably determine what collection methodologies we're going to use. How are we going to engage these individual stakeholders or stakeholder groups in order to receive or elicit their requirements? Are we going to do surveys? Are we going to have focus groups? Are we going to do interviews? Are we going to do job shadowing? There are a whole bunch of different techniques that we could use. Right? At some point, we need to do an executive summary. Right? I need to take, let me just say it this way. If I'm collecting requirements from developers about what they need in order to be able to achieve this for us, I need to take those back to them and I say, all right, is this what you need? Can you produce this? I need to go back to the users and I say, is this what you really want? The developers have said that they can do this and they've signed off. If we produce this for you, will you use it? Do you think this is really going to meet your need? If they say yes, then we take that in a separate presentation to the executives and we say, all right, here's what we're doing. This is executive summary stuff. Please understand, the executives don't care about functionality. They certainly don't care about the non-functional requirements, how we're actually going to get it done, what language this is going to be programmed in, right? They don't care what the screens look like. They don't care what the color is, right? They want something that's going to increase sales. So if you can show how this is going to lead to increased sales, that's what they want to hear. And we want to communicate with each one of these audiences about the things that are of interest to them.
Hey, Lou, we have a question.
Good.
Brahman wants to know, so is there a difference between a project charter and an executive summary?
Yes. I think of an executive summary as a page and a half that I'm going to present to the executive saying, here's what we're going to do, will you sign off on it, right? Here's what you've asked us to do, here's what we're going to build, here's what we expect it to do, please sign here if you agree. The project charter comes the other way. The project charter is written, if not by the executive, it's written for their signature as if it were coming from them. So as a project manager, you might, you might be delegated the responsibility of preparing a project charter that says, here's what we hope to do, here's what we want to have happen, and it's basically a very high-level description of the project. And in addition to describing the project, it names the project manager. So it's all right, Kathy, here's what we want you to do, and you're the project manager, go forth and conquer. Right? The executive summary would be something that I would write, now sending back. Now I'm communicating to the executives and saying, bottom line, here's what's happening, right? Because your executives don't have the time or the interest or the background to be concerned with features and functions and all the sausage making that goes on. Does that make sense, Brahman?
He says that makes sense. Thanks, Lou.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Nope. People, remember, you can just type your questions in.
Okay, don't hold back. Don't be shy. All right, here we go. Now, when we think about, I've mentioned a couple of the different kinds of requirements. Here are some of them, right? Not all of them, some of them, right? The project requirements, right? High-level stuff. These are conditions that we have to satisfy. So we might say training materials have to be delivered in final form by October 31st. I got one of those from Kathy the other day. Kathy said, I need this information back from you by Wednesday so that we can get this all ready for the webinar on Thursday, right? That was the project requirement for this webinar. Now we've got technical requirements, and that's how do we do this, right? So now it's about reliability, it's about user, I hate the term, user friendliness, right? What does that mean, right? Is it up 24/7 or is 99% availability fine, right? So Kathy worked with Brandon about the technical stuff. And you know what? As the presenter, I don't really care about the technical stuff as long as it's available at noon and until 1 o'clock, and I've got ways to know who's here, to understand what your questions are, and to be able to show you what I want to show you. Those are technical requirements. I don't need to know that stuff. I don't know how to set up this meeting. That's not what I'm good at. And then we got regulatory requirements, right? So there's privacy, there's confidentiality, there's security requirements and things like that we have to think about. Okay, or the one that they've mentioned here: all websites must comply with the Americans with Disabilities legibility requirements. Okay, so whatever these are, we have to describe these requirements in various ways and understand what we've done, what we're doing here. Do I have time for this? I think I do. I do. I'm going to do it anyway. When we're gathering requirements like this, we're like the three blind men that are trying to describe an elephant. I don't know if you've heard that story, and you're probably thinking Lou finally lost it. Okay, well, maybe so, but I don't think so. Here's what happens, right? We start out our project. We are very much like these three blind guys who've been told there's an elephant out there right in front of you. Describe the elephant, because we need to make one of those things, right? So the first guy, imagine a blind guy walking up to an elephant. He walks up to the front of the elephant, grabs him by the trunk, feels the trunk for a little bit, and then reports back to his colleagues, and he says, all right, guys, I've just checked out this elephant thing, whatever it is, and I'm here to tell you an elephant's like a fire hose. That's interesting, said the second guy, and the second blind guy walks up to the elephant, and he ends up at the other end of the elephant and grabs the tail, and he says, no, 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 an elephant's not like a fire hose, my friend. An elephant is like a rope. So the third blind guy says, here, let me settle this once and for all, and he walks up to the elephant, and he happens to bump into a leg and wraps his arm around the leg, and he says, you guys are nuts. An elephant's not like a fire hose or a rope. An elephant is like a tree trunk. Now, if we think about this, all of them were a little bit right, weren't they? All of them were an awful lot wrong, though. Nobody really had the full picture. So if we, and not even the three of them, had we put them all together, had the three picture, in fact, right? Because we didn't think about the mouth, we didn't think about the tusks, didn't think about the big old flappy ears, three more tree trunks, and a big old belly, right? So understand that what we have to do is we have to take all of these requirements, the project requirements, the technical requirements, the regulatory requirements, the user requirements, we have to take all this stuff together. We have to figure this out, just like the blind guys. We have to figure out what this is going to look like. And we need to use a number of different tools and techniques, and we need to talk to a number of different stakeholders to make sure that we've completely described the elephant. Okay?
Hey, Lou.
Yeah, Kathy.
I love your story. I do have one. I do have one question here, Sherry Scott. It's in reference to the project charter and the executive summary discussion you had just a little bit ago. She just wants to reiterate the question. Are both of these created by the project manager?
Executive summaries certainly would be. Project charters may be, okay? But Sherry, if I would like let me put it this way. The project charter comes from senior management, okay? So while they may ask me to write the charter, I need to write it in their voice, if you understand what I mean by that. It's got to be as if the executive, the senior manager is saying, here's what I want you to do. It's as if it came from him, even if I did write it. Does that help, Sherry?
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. By the way, Kathy, feel free to use the elephant. Feel free to use the elephant story, by the way.
I will. Thank you.
Any of you can. Now all I have to do is say describe the elephant, and you can't possibly forget it. Okay, good. Now, when we think about stakeholder, we talked about setting stakeholder expectations. We set those expectations by our communicating with the stakeholders about what they need. Then we have to manage those expectations. We have to make sure that it's clear what they want, what they need, what we can do for them. And there are barriers in our communication with our stakeholders that can interrupt this communication and the management of those expectations. Environmental barriers, we may be in different places. We may have a virtual team. There are group or cultural barriers, right? Take a look at what's going on in the country today. There are so many barriers in this country, it's unbelievable. Even if we're talking about, different languages, different nationalities, right? Different social groups, right? Those are barriers. And then we've got individual barriers, right? We all have those people that, if we could choose, we'd rather not have to deal with them ever again, right? But we have to work with them. All of these barriers are things that we have to take into consideration and we have to overcome. So we may have to communicate a little bit differently in order to make sure that we're clear and everybody's understanding what's going on, okay? Now, when we think about communication planning, hang on a second. Okay. Oh, I'm supposed to ask you. There's supposed to be another polling question
Another poll?
right now.
Yep. Yeah, I'll launch that poll, but also we are getting close to, we're at about 12:45, so we might, if you want to skip the next poll, we can do that just to save some time.
Okay, let's do this one. We'll skip the next one.
Okay, here we go.
This is a quick one. Vote fast.
Everybody vote. Project stakeholders include all of the following except. 21% have voted. 48% have voted. Keep it coming, everyone. 62% have voted. We'll give it 10 more seconds. 5 more seconds. And I'll close the polls now. And the answers.
Aha. Okay, remember that we said it's a person, group, or organization. Stakeholders are any of those. People, individuals, groups, or organizations. The only one here that is not an organization or a group or an individual is government regulation. Testers can influence the project. Quality assurance manager can influence the project. And the users, of course, right? Everybody got that one right. So it's government regulation. Okay, that would be a constraint. All right, let's move on. When we're thinking about our communication with our stakeholders, we need to think about what's the best way to reach out to them, right? What are we communicating? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to give information, get information, achieve unity of thought? We need to think about people's personal preferences for how they want to be communicated with. What's their schedule? What's their availability? We want to think about bandwidth. Sometimes a text message is fine. You probably don't want to communicate with senior management by text. Okay? They want a little bit more. Consider what they need, right? We don't want to under-communicate, and we probably don't want to over-communicate either. We don't want to bore people with stuff that's not of interest to them, right? So think about, and right now we have so many different opportunities to communicate. We need to think, when do we need an email? When do we need face-to-face? Conference call, text messages, right? There are lots of different opportunities. Use these appropriately, and this is tough. It's hard to know when to use which method, okay? I like face-to-face better than just about anything, right? Email's good. I'm not a big texter, to be perfectly frank. Okay. All right? Now, when we think about our communication plan, by the way, the communication in order to manage stakeholder expectations is absolutely crucial. We have to know what it is that's going to keep our stakeholders happy, satisfied, informed, so that they're not bothering us with, random questions at odd times, right? We want to be communicating periodically, regularly with our stakeholders. So think about the project milestones that they're going to want to know about. What about status meetings or reports? If we understand that we've got reports that are going to be coming out every 2 weeks and our stakeholders know that, they're not going to be asking questions the day before if they know we're going to answer them. Okay? So think about that, plan it out. Have a plan that you can follow. Okay? So, we've got some periodic things that are happening. We want to do the same kind of things with our project, right? For key communications. As we think about, as projects come together, we've got a number of different stages in bringing a team together. We start with forming, where we have to guide the team. This is where we can be very directive. Our role changes as we move from forming, where we first come together, to storming, when people are starting to figure out how they're going to work together. We start to do some norming, right? Getting everybody now on the same page, everybody's in the same direction, and then our role changes to when we're performing. We are simply trying to solve problems. We're trying to make, clear the road for the team to do their work. Okay? Typical stages for project team development. We talk about emotional intelligence, being self-aware, knowing about our emotions and their effect on others. Being able to, second step is to be able to control our impulses and to suspend judgment and to act effectively. Motivation, understanding why we're motivated, what's our passion, what's driving the other people on the team. To be able to empathize with others on the team, right? Understanding their emotional makeup is going to help us work better with them. And then, of course, the social skills, being able to effectively and proficiently work with different groups. Okay, and there's a quick primer on emotional intelligence that's referenced here that you might want to have a look at to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence. When we have, if there are problems with projects, we have to think about what's the issue, right? We have to identify the issue. It may be that the stakeholder's expectation doesn't jive with reality. There's a difference between what their expectation is and what's actually going to happen. And we are then in between there, right? The issue being what that gap is, and we have to help them resolve that, right? That's what issues are, right? We have to make sure that they understand what that issue is and get their involvement in deciding what the options are for solving that. All right? So understand what that is, make sure that we can, close the gap between the expectation and reality. Okay? Now, as we're talking with stakeholders, we need to make sure that we understand what people's underlying motivations are. We want to make sure, we may be listening to the words, but what's underneath it, right? We have to make sure that if there's an agenda, we know what that is. We have to state it clearly, right? And we have to resolve both the stated and the unstated problems, okay? Our job is really a communication job. Our communication skills are primary here. Conflict resolution, let me do this one really quickly. If you're in a situation, and we often are, where we have to resolve conflicts, if people have taken positions, it's really difficult to solve that because they'll die for their positions before they'll give in. If we can start looking at what their interests are, what are they trying to achieve, the interests are easier to resolve, and we'll often find that the interests of the two groups are very similar, and that opens up a whole panorama of possible solutions, okay? Don't have more time on it than that. I wish I did. It's an interesting topic. Think about strikes, any kind of strike, right? A labor strike of some sort. People take positions. If we can understand what their interests are, we'll probably find that there's a possible solution that would be better than taking the positions. Okay? If the problem is a reality that we don't like the reality, then we have to move it, right? We have to make the needs real. If reality is such that it can't be changed to meet the need, then we have to move the expectation. We say, all right, we can't. That's beyond us. We can't do it. Okay. All right. Good. I think we're done. Viable solutions. All right. Just real quick. If expectations are unmet, right? Do they have possible solutions? What are they? Maybe we can't afford it, right? Maybe that's the reality that we can't change, right? We have to know what we can do and what we can't do. And then we have to balance what they call the triple constraint: scope, time, and cost, right? Scope, time, and cost, crucial to project management, okay? What are those trade-offs between scope, time, and cost? If you've ever bought a car, you know what it is, right? You go in, you ask for leather, hey, more money. Oh, I don't have more money. Okay, fine. So the scope didn't change. All right. Finally, what we need to do is we need to confirm the solution. We need to take it back. This is our executive summary. Take it back to our stakeholders in whatever form they need it in order to get their agreement for that solution and their acceptance of it at the end of the project. All right. Here's some tips. You can read these tomorrow. We've talked about several of them. I need to hand this back off to Kathy. Does any? All right, here you go, Kathy.
No, you're fine. Yeah, everybody, this is your last chance. Please type your questions in, and I'm happy to present those to Lou. While we're waiting for your questions, I do want to let you know about a couple promotions that we have going right now. We are offering, for all of you who have attended this webinar, 20% off of the classes that we will have listed on the next slide. Also, we do have right now a buy two get one free promotion, so that could be used in conjunction with the 20% off. You will receive these slides and more information in the email that we will be following up with this webinar. So you see, we actually have a class that goes much deeper. Lou, I'll give you like 30 seconds to talk about this class if you'd like to, the Managing a Project with Your Team. The class will run December 3 and 4. Lou?
This class is going to be a lot of fun. It's loaded with exercise that's going to help us sort of learn how we can do these. We'll actually give you some practice with some of the tools that we've talked about and some others. We're going to go into all these things in a lot of detail. And I will do my absolute best to answer the questions that you've got.
Okay.
All the questions that are going to come up on this. A lot of fun. We'll talk in depth about stakeholders, stakeholder analysis, communication, and all of that. So.
Excellent. So I have two questions. I think they're related. Okay. Sherry's asking in the first, she says, can you provide an explanation again of the stakeholder, that lower left box where the power versus interest? And then she adds in there, she said, you mentioned that the two lower boxes were cheerleaders, so what is the difference?
Okay. What was the first question again, Kathy? I'm sorry.
Provide an explanation again of the stakeholder lower left box of the power interest.
Okay. Those are stakeholders who really have minimal interest or maybe negative interest in our project. They really don't care for it, or you know those users who really don't want there to be a change because they're going to feel de-skilled and they have to learn another program and stuff like that. That would be those people. Okay. Now, if we were talking about, let's say, an upgrade to something, some of the users are going to be in favor of it. Some of the users may be opposed to it, right? And these would be the people down in the lower half of that graph. These are the people who, they can weigh in positively or negatively, but the upgrade's going to happen, okay? They're not going to make it work or make it not work, but if we have people saying good things about it, it's going to make it easier. Does that help, Sherry?
She says, yes, it does help. Thank you, Lou.
Okay, very good. Anything else?
I don't have any other questions from anybody.
Okay.
So I want to thank you so much, Lou, for presenting today. I know he's presented in many other webinars for us. You were just wonderful to work with, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank
Always
you.
a pleasure.
And just want to remind everybody as a wrap here that we will be emailing to you an email with links to the slide deck and the recording, as well as the list of classes that we have for promotion. If you want to receive that 20% off, just know that you don't have to make a purchase decision right now, but in order to secure a seat, we just need to know your interest. So give us a call. The number's available on the slides. It'll be available in the email. Give us a call and say you want to reserve a seat in one of these classes at the 20% off. You'll have until the end of business day on Monday to do so. So I want to thank everybody again for your time. We hope you had a wonderful lunch with us. We did, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.